Shalom. The title of today's drash might be Get a Grip. We face any number of troubles in our life. Times where we don't understand what God is doing. Times where the promises of God seem to be incomplete or failing. Times when the circumstances are so contrary to that which is godly that it just seems unreal. Now, how in those times can we get a grip on life? At least so that we can continue to live out our life in some semblance of faithfulness. I think that Avram, again, can help us as he plants a tree. Before we dive in, let's pray. Dear Heavenly Father, again, we thank you for your goodness, for your kindness. We thank you for your faithfulness, and particularly for your mercy towards us, for your help in being with us. I would ask, Father, now that as we consider your word, the things that you would have for us, that you would teach us again of yourself. We ask, Father, in Yeshua's name. Amen. So, what does planting a tree have to do with getting a grip, you might ask? At least I hope you ask that. Let me explain. As we have been reading in Abraham's life, he has faced and overcome some horrendous troubles. A brief recap of them includes leading an immigrant clan into an unknown land, surviving an immediate famine once he gets there, surviving the abduction of his wife twice, enduring the several visitations from God, as emotionally draining as each one of them were, enduring the trouble of Hagar and Ishmael, persevering through the loss of Lot and the judgments on Sodom and Amorah, and overcoming the war with the Mesopotamian kings. This is quite a list, and it is only partial. Now Avraham faces another trial. The Philistines have come to Avraham. They are the current overlords in the land that has been promised to Avraham. And they are asking Avraham for a treaty, a covenant of peace, a non-aggression pact. In effect, they are asking Avraham to give up the opportunity to inherit, understand possess, the land promised to him. The promise remains, but the opportunity to possess is being taken away. Now, Avraham agrees, perhaps realizing the implications of his actions, but not in a position to do anything about it. He will not possess all the land. Perhaps he will receive none of the land. Perhaps it will now only be for future generations to inherit and possess. So Avraham agrees, and he enters a sacred covenant, a covenant of 7, a covenant of an oath. Now I wish I could explain how 7 and oath are related, oath coming from the Hebrew word shavah, meaning 7, but that'll have to come at another time. In any case, Avraham enters the covenant, this non-aggression pact that precludes him from possessing all the land. And then he must immediately exercise the terms of that covenant to redress the grievance of a crucial water well that has been taken from him. It is trouble upon trouble again for Avraham. How does Avraham deal with this? If you cheat just a little bit, and it's okay with me if you do, and read ahead, the next chapter of Genesis has perhaps the greatest trial for Avraham, the Akedah, the binding of Yitzchak. With this greatest trial looming, how does Avraham respond to the trial of the loss of personally inheriting or possessing all of the land? He plants a tree. He plants a tree and he calls on the name of Adonai. He plants a tree and calls on the name of Adonai. I am not sure this fits for me. If this is going to help us respond to difficult situations in our life, we need to understand this a lot better. Unless, of course, we are Johnny Appleseed, then planting trees is everything. I think we need to look into this tree thing a bit, and then look at the call on the name of Adonai. So the tree, it's a tamarisk tree. In Hebrew, it's an eshel. Eshel means a tamarisk tree. The lexicon suggests that this tree has deep roots. Okay, but that still doesn't give me much. So we need to go looking a little further. So sometimes in Hebrew, the words occur, there are related words that occur with the inversion of some of the letters. If we swap the aleph and the shin in the word eshel, we come up with the word sha'al, and it means to ask or to inquire. One of the words derived from that is Sheol, the underworld, the place of the dead. How might the tamarisk tree, the eshel, be related to this idea of sha'al, of asking and inquiring, or even related to the Sheol, the underworld? In the Gesenius lexicon, he suggests that the core idea of sha'al is to dig or to excavate, dig into something. Now Sheol, the underworld, is an area that is hollowed out within the earth, an area that's been dug out. So the idea of asking, inquiring, is metaphysically digging into an issue. And Sheol, the area that's been dug out or hollowed out inside the earth, is the place of the dead. So now there's getting to be a connection, and the fact that the eshel tree is planted in the earth, and we'll come up with some more things in a little bit, but that digging into, that inquiring and wondering, I think there's a connection between the eshel tree and sha'al. Now, it is interesting that the deep roots of the eshel, remember we had talked, the one thing that they said is the eshel, the tamarisk tree, has deep roots. The deep roots of the eshel are a picture of a tree that is digging out earth in search of water. The eshel is a tree that digs deep into the earth in search of water. Now that's interesting. For Avraham, he doesn't understand the various troubles he is facing, and he is searching and digging into the issue. He wants to understand. He's going to obey, but he wants to understand. Perhaps in planting an eshel, Avraham is making a statement that he is searching, the word sha'al, and inquiring of Adonai for an understanding. He says, I'm searching, so he plants an eshel. Perhaps Avraham is acknowledging that he may never know, because searching doesn't mean you found an answer. It only means you're looking. And perhaps Avraham is willing to allow the final answer to be an open issue before Adonai. Searching but never coming to the conclusion, and that's okay with Avraham. Okay, so this eshel tree, this searching, digging into something. Okay, let's see how that fits into, or if it fits with the other issue that we wanted to talk about, which is to call on the name of Adonai. This collection of words, this calling, kara, in the name or on the name, b'shem Adonai, occurs with slight variations in the sentences where it's used about 15 times in the scripture. There are 5 times in the book of Genesis, one time each in the book of Exodus, 1 Kings, 2 Kings, and Zephaniah. There are 3 times that it occurs in Psalm 116. So that's going to be interesting to look at. It occurs then one more time in the book of Joel, and then that passage is quoted in the book of Acts and in Romans. So I'd like to pick just a few. I don't want to look at all 15 of these. I just want to look at a few of these to highlight for us what this calling on the name of the Lord is about. But first, let me remind us about the idea of what to call kara means. It is not the idea of pronouncing or enunciating. It's not this guy down here with a megaphone trying to call out. That is not what it means to call on the name of the Lord. It is much more of the idea of a legal summons, a legal appeal. It is a formal, legal, authoritative request for the presence of a person. That's what it means to call. It is to request the presence of a person, and it's legally binding to the degree that the person making it can enforce. Next, we have all heard much about the understanding of what a name is. It is not simply an identifier for a person, place, or thing. In Hebrew, it connotes the character, the personality, even the major importance of a person or place or thing. So the name of Adonai is not simply an identifier of the Creator God. Rather, it invokes on our thoughts the memorial name, the covenant name, the gracious name of the Elohim of Avraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov. When we say the name of Adonai, all sorts of things should flood into our thoughts about who He is. Okay, so we've got to call, we've got the understanding of name, a starter. Let's look at a few of these passages. First one is Genesis 12:8. There's a portion of it there. I'll read the full verse here. Then he, Avraham, proceeded from there, actually it's Avram at this point, to the mountain on the east of Bethel, and pitched his tent, with Bethel on the west and Ai on the east. And there he built an altar to Adonai and called on the name of Adonai. Avram had just entered the land of promise, the land of Canaan. He was going out from where he had been in Haran, out of his father's home, out of his father's house, in obedience to God's command. He was leading a troop of folks, but he was alone as the head. He needed Adonai's presence to be with him, to help him, to guide and encourage him. So Avram builds an altar. Now we can reasonably assume that he made an offering on that altar, probably a whole burnt offering, perhaps peace offerings. But important to the story, he called on the name of Adonai. Avraham needed Adonai's presence, and he made a legal appeal to Adonai to come and be with him. He needed a kinsman to walk beside him. Next, after Avram returns. Now he's returning. He had gotten into the land, and then there was a famine right away. We'd mentioned that. And then he goes right into Egypt. And this picks up next. After Avram returns from this excursion, he returns to the place that he had built the altar previously and calls. Again, he calls on the name of Adonai. This is Genesis 13:4, not Exodus. It starts, to the place of the altar which he had made there formerly. And there Avram called on the name of the Lord. Avram is again back at the same place, in the land of promise, in the land of Canaan, and though richer in this world's wealth, yet he still needs a kinsman to walk with him. So Avram invokes the name. He makes a legal appeal to Adonai to be present with him. After this, we have the incident that we were talking about earlier with Avimelech, the king of the Philistines, and the covenant and then the well issue. And in response to all of this, Avraham plants a tree. This is Exodus 21:33. Avraham planted a tamarisk tree at Beersheba, and there he called on the name of the Lord, the everlasting God. Avraham was in a position. Now this is similar to Joshua many years later. So let me extract for a moment and go to Joshua. Joshua was conquering the land, and one of the people, one of the more powerful people, the Gibeonites, heard of what Joshua was doing and decided that they didn't want to be destroyed. And so they sent a troop of an envoy, a group of people, to go to Joshua and to sign a non-aggression pact with him, to make an agreement that Joshua would be in accord with them. He wouldn't attack them and they wouldn't attack him. And they did this and tricked him by using deceitfulness. They had old dried out bread and broken wineskins and worn out shoes. They said, "We've been traveling a long time." Even though they were to be exterminated, and in the end they became slaves, they tricked Joshua, and because he made that legal agreement, he could not possess the land of the Gibeonites. So Avram is in that same kind of position. He has made this non-aggression pact with the Philistines, and in some sense he cannot now possess all the land that Adonai had promised to him. Remember from Genesis 13 verses 14 and 15, now Adonai said to Avram, after Lot had separated from him, "Now lift up your eyes and look to the place where you are." Look from the place where you are, northward and southward and eastward and westward. For all the land which you see, I will give it to you and to your descendants forever. The land was being given to Avram to possess. Now, whether he could physically and actually possess the entire land of Canaan, okay, but he had the legal right to it. And now, because of this treaty, this non-aggression pact of the Philistines, he does not have that right. So I'm proposing that Avraham was in this place of being unsure of the turn of events. It perhaps didn't make sense to him. He tried to search out the answer. Why was it that God called him in, gave him the land, and now the Philistines have kind of snuck in and made this non-aggression pact so he could not possess the entire land? And he tried to look for an answer and he couldn't find one. And because he couldn't find it, he leaves himself in the position of searching and plants an eshel tree and calls on the name of Adonai. Again, Avraham is in need. Now this time he's not in need of a kinsman. This time he is in need of a redeemer who is going to come and make the situation with the Philistines right. He's going to reset that situation. Somehow, some way, Avraham doesn't even have a clue how, but a redeemer is what he needs, and he calls on Adonai to do it. Okay, let me skip ahead a little bit here, and we're going to go to Psalm 116. And the author here 3 times says that he will call on the name of Adonai. 3 times is kind of nice. It says that there's something seriously going on here. So let me, I've got up here Psalms 116, the first 4 verses. Verse 4 says, "Then I will call upon the name of Adonai. O Adonai, I beseech you, save my life." In verse 13, "I shall lift up the cup of salvation and call on the name of Adonai." And then in verse 17, to you I shall offer a sacrifice of thanksgiving and call on the name of Adonai. The psalmist has faced a trial that almost took his life. Many suggest that this was a life-threatening disease, that he was on his deathbed, almost dead. And in his distress he, quote, called on the name of Adonai. And Adonai rescued him and delivered him and restored him. The psalmist needed a kinsman to stand by him and a redeemer to rescue him. Like Avram, he looked to the one who could save him, and he was delivered from death. Now, it's not uncommon for us to be in situations, like we talked about at the beginning, situations where we are perhaps confused and searching to understand, difficult situations where things don't make sense. And we really want to understand. We're searching to understand. We do this sha'al, we dig into it, we try and explore it, but we're still confused. We don't understand. Or we may be in situations where we are in need of comfort and direction because we don't know what is ahead or what we're to do, why things are happening. We may even be in situations where we are in desperate peril, even of our very life. All of these situations come upon us. And how do we respond? In these situations, in all of these situations, we can do as Avram did, as the psalmist of 116 did. We can build an altar. If we're holding on to something that we shouldn't be holding on to, we need to be willing to give that up, to sacrifice it, as it were, on an altar to Adonai. We can plant an eshel, a tamarisk tree, a tree that is reflective of the idea that we don't understand, and we're okay not understanding, that we will leave our inquiry there with God and continue to search perhaps, but we will trust in what God is doing. And then, with having built the altar, planted the tree, we call on the name of Adonai. Because Adonai is the faithful kinsman who will come alongside. Adonai is the faithful Redeemer who will bring deliverance and will reset our lives. And Adonai is the faithful Avenger who will bring justice for his people, for those who call on the name of Adonai. Shabbat Shalom.